What's up, YouTube? Today I'm going to be addressing the elephant in the room in terms of the forgotten lifts of the Bronze and Silver eras, which is, if they were so good, then why were they forgotten? Or maybe Mastodon in the room is going to be more appropriate given the theme that I'm going to use for this, because I've been on kind of a ancient animals kick. My 4-year-old is really into dinosaurs. This is one of her favorite books. The second Dinotopia. We've got all of them. I know some of you are going to be mad at me for letting a book get this damaged, but this is a very loved book by, this is the perfect page for it, by a very cute little kid. And we have little Stubbs. I know little Stubbs' name anyway. So I've been on my own. I've been interested in researching that stuff when I'm not looking into lifting, just for fun. You listen to a YouTube video on dinosaurs. In this video, we'll be explaining why Crylophosaurus, she's got like 40 of these. This one's my favorite. I'll explain that later. But anyway, what I've been thinking is basically there was kind of an extinction event, if you will, a mass extinction event in lifting, roughly in the 1960s to 1980s, we'll call it. So today I'm going to be trying to explain this mass extinction event that caused a lot of really cool dinosaur exercises, if you will, to die off. I'm going to be giving you my explanations for that. Obviously, if this interests you, my book will probably interest you. I'm already getting a lot of rave reviews, and thank you to everybody who's bought it. I really appreciate that. And if you want to support this channel and have me continue making content like this, that's definitely the best way to do it. The more I get support that way, the easier it'll be to just focus on YouTube, just making content as a way to sell the book and make income that way. So I do appreciate your support. Anyway, yeah, there does seem to have been kind of an extinction event when it comes to lifts. We have this conception of the past where the lifters of the past just got big on the basics, and things were simpler back then. They had fewer exercises. They just worked really hard at the basics and just made things work anyway, even though they didn't have as much complexity as we do today. And of course, that's a myth. You saw that a little bit last week when it turns out that instead of just doing the big three, just doing deadlifts, it turns out a lot of bodybuilders were doing Jefferson curls, just not by that name. So I think there's a lot of unappreciated complexity back in those previous eras, but a lot of that has died out. And it seems like some of it had already died out, but I think a lot of it died out roughly in that 60s to 80s time frame. So I'm going to try to explain that, give my theories as to what caused the extinction event, kind of like what is it, the KT boundary? That's kind of this extinction event where the asteroid created like the asteroid version of nuclear winter and killed off most of the dinosaurs except for the birds. Or supposedly there was something much more recent than that, which caused the die-off of, let me see if I can find the Pleistocene megafauna, meaning the mammals. Let's see if I can find some cool pictures of a big sloth or something in here. Maybe I can't. Is that in this one? I don't know. Well, if it, you know what, that may be in the other one. They have some really cool pictures of Megatherium, the giant sloth. But anyway, supposedly there may have been an asteroid impact or series of asteroid impacts, like 11,000 years ago or something to that effect, that caused a rapid end to the Ice Age and may have wiped out a bunch of the megafauna. There's a bunch of theories going on, but that one's called the Younger Dryas impact theory, which has a lot of interesting implications. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It's interesting anyway. So there seems to have been a similar event, less comets, less Ice Age ending, but something caused the die-off of a lot of ancient cool stuff, the kind of Megatheriums, Crylophosauruses of the lifting world, so to speak. So I'm going to get into that. So this is all a little bit speculative on my part, but these are the factors that I think contributed most to the extinction event that caused a lot of these really cool time exercises to be forgotten. And the first one is, I think, the transition from an in-person, gym-based lifting culture to a mass media-based lifting culture. Okay, so at one time in the Bronze era, a a lot of lifting culture was based around gyms. If you were a serious lifter, you'd go to, one of the gyms where these lifts were practiced, and of course there'd be, a lot of serious lifters there. You teach each other, you teach new guys. You could learn from people, you could see what everyone else was doing. If you were doing something wrong, you could ask questions. If you had issues, somebody could help you through it. And obviously this facilitates a very rich culture full of information, full of potential for detail, nuance, just individual correction, just individual learning. And you can get a lot of really good granular detail that way, right? And that continued through to the Silver era. If you were a serious lifter, you probably went to maybe York Barbell or Muscle Beach, one of the West Coast areas. Whereas when the golden era hit, now we start transitioning into mass culture. So now instruction on lifting primarily is happening through things like muscle magazines, which are being shipped out to places where new gyms have sprung up, where maybe there are no really serious lifters. There's not an established lifting culture, and most people are getting their information on lifting from some kind of mass media, right? So that's going to be a little bit different, because now you don't have experienced lifters who know anything and everything educating you in person. Now you're pretty much getting your information from printed word. There's a limited amount that they can print, and of course there's no personal instruction. There's no ability to review your form, check what's going on. So we're going to get some detail loss, and quite frankly, you're going to have to dumb things down to mail it out to masses of people you've never met. I mean, even content creators today deal with this issue. We have to think about what advice we give, because is someone who may not be the sharpest tool in the shed going to take it the wrong way and do something stupid and hurt themselves? We have to think about that. So when you're just sending something out to anyone and everyone, on some level you have to dumb it down to the lowest common denominator so nobody gets confused. And I mean, you can pretty easily see how that would impact some of these more complicated old school exercises. I mean, can you even imagine trying to instruct on the bent press via a muscle magazine? Maybe you get this much space in a page to instruct on it. I mean, first of all, it's not going to make any sense when someone just reads it. I mean, you have to see it. You kind of have to see it for it to make sense. And even then, it doesn't make sense. You're not sure what you're looking at. The technique itself is very complicated. It's not intuitive. Not only that, you've got a ton of mobility prerequisites that a lot of people aren't going to meet. You've got to have a certain degree of shoulder external rotation. You've got to have a certain amount of hip mobility, spinal flexion. Just imagine trying to put that out in a short article in a muscle magazine. You may have to give them a mobility routine so they can even do the movement, plus the actual description of the technique. I mean, you can see how, regardless of how awesome the bent press is, it's going to be a nightmare to put that out in a muscle magazine. So you can kind of see why that was shied away from, right? Let's take an example that seems like it's not as complex, but still kind of proves the rule. The pullover. Now, the pullover's been very controversial recently because some people who don't know how to do pullovers correctly, like Paul Carter, absolutely insist that it cannot be a lat exercise. It's only a chest and tricep exercise because science tells us so, even though these people don't have any science background that I can tell, but whatever. Anyway, this is because they're not doing the pullover correctly for lats, okay? You've got to have a certain degree of spinal extension to make it work. Otherwise, you're probably, going to be recruiting more chest. You've got to play around with it to make sure that you're able to really engage your lats without getting too much elbow strain. And that's going to be a little bit different position for everybody. So you may have to vary up your implements. A lot of people like dumbbells. A lot of people like easy curl bars. Some people like straight bars, There's some variety to it to just make it work for you. And this seems like a very simple exercise. Like, it almost seems like an isolation exercise almost for the lats. Not quite, but it's fairly close. It's a simple developmental exercise. Shouldn't be anything nearly as complicated as the bent press, obviously, but there is a degree of nuance to it. And because it seems so simple, but a few little things you might not think about, like not extending enough of the spine, can completely throw it off and make it not do the thing that you're thinking it's going to do. You can easily see how, when that gets presented out to a wide audience just via some text, it may not go over well. A lot of people may try the way one pro describes it, that he does it, and that doesn't work for them. Either they're not feeling it in the lats as much as they want to, or they're perhaps getting too much elbow strain, or just, something or other doesn't work for them. Well, I mean, this is an entire movement category, right? It was considered the squat for the upper body back in the day, in the Silver and Bronze eras, and it had a ton of variations, just like the back squat. You have anything from extremely heavy bent arm pullovers to straight arm pullovers, all sorts of various ways to do them. Now you have to try to get all that nuance into a little article describing the pullover. You can easily be putting out kind of a one-size-fits-all solution that doesn't really set your readers, who may not all be the most gifted people, it doesn't really set them up for success in making this pullover work for their objectives. So that's my take on why the pullover didn't translate well to the mass media era. Now, it would be a whole different story if you're in person with someone showing you, and you can say, hey, I'm not feeling it in my lats like I'm supposed to. What's going on? Oh yeah, do it like this. Hey, I'm feeling this a little bit too much in my elbows. Do you know what's going on? Oh yeah, just do it like this. Hey, I'm losing tension here. Oh yeah, use this bench, or there, right? So there's a lot more you can do with that older in-person style cultures. That makes sense to make more complex lifts work. And I think there was also, with that, there was a tendency to try to streamline the number of lifts that we do have a whole lot of in-depth detail out on, like the squat, bench, and deadlift. If it's a lot harder to teach somebody how to do a movement via print, via a magazine, via books, etc., than it is in person. So if that's what we're going to do, let's streamline the number of exercises that we're putting out that much detail on into a smaller number of lifts. And while we're at it, let's just make them the lifts that we're all competing in. So we're going to have just a few big compound lifts that we put that much detail out on, and then we can kind of assume that everyone knows how to do those. So those are the ones that we use that way, and those are the big compounds that we're safe in teaching to everyone, because with all the information that is out there on them, we can assume that people can figure it out hopefully, and then everything else we'll just use machines or easy isolations that are a little bit harder to screw up on. On that note, when you're putting out information to anyone and everyone, they may not all have the most common sense. You do have to dumb it down to the lowest common denominator and try to make sure that everything you're putting out there isn't something that can get someone hurt if they misinterpret it or do something stupid. You have to be a little bit more cautious. I mean, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt and put out valuable exercises so that people can use them, and just hope that people can use them well. But even I have to be conscious of, like, is something that I'm trying to say that may help some people, is it going to be misinterpreted by others and get people injured? And I have to try to be very careful about that. So that's a major concern of anyone putting out just information to countless unknown people that you've never met in your life. And it should be, you do have to think about, hey, is this something that I can actually explain to the dumbest person that it gets to in a way that's not going to get them hurt? And that is going to tend to make you a little bit more conservative with what you put out there. So I think that definitely had a role in why some of the complexity, some of the exercises that, well, I think they all can be performed safely. I think there's value in all of them. They can all be performed safely. I do think some of them, I can easily see saying, you know what, I don't want to take the risk of trying to describe this, trying to put it out there, and somebody gets the wrong idea and drops a barbell on their head. I'm just going to leave it out, So I do think that is also a factor in why, the transition to more of a mass culture may have led some people to just eliminate some of that complexity and try to make it something a little bit simpler. On that note, what happened in the 60s that would drastically increase injury risk and would make potentially more tendon straining exercises suddenly a lot less appealing? What I'm hinting at is the invention of steroids. Now, people will tell you, oh, steroids were invented in the 30s or 40s or whatever, but okay, they didn't have any good products that anyone was using until 58. No one was using, or if anyone tried, they quickly realized that the product they had only gave them side effects and no gains, and they stopped it. The stuff they had before 58 was trash, and no one would have gotten any gains out of it anyway. Except apparently the Russians did, but they have, these are the people that would have the frontline soldiers charge, and if any of them retreated, they would shoot them in the back. I mean, the Soviets were not known for having a whole lot of concern for human life and limb. So anyway, um, yeah. Well, one thing that we know about steroids is that they increase the size and strength of muscles relative to connective tissue. So that translates to increased injury risk. You're more likely to tear a muscle, pull a muscle off the bone, tear your pec benching, tear your biceps, etc. Right? You're kind of voiding the warranty. Your body naturally has a balance of strength from your tendons to your muscles. If you disproportionately increase muscle strength, you run the risk of injuries. So I think that's going to cause a shift in what exercises are popular, away from exercises that are highly stressful or highly dependent on a lot of tendon strength. Now, those exercises can be very positive because they also build tendon strength. So they're going to make you more resilient if used properly. But if you're already doing something that makes you at more risk for injury anyway, there's an obvious reason why that might be less appealing. And at the extreme end, with modern mass monsters who are not just taking steroids but taking God knows what, insulin and growth hormone and things that I don't even know the names of. I mean, you get to a point where they're starting to injure themselves just by going to failure on regular bodybuilding exercises, isolation exercises, really like stuff that you wouldn't even think you'd get injured on. They have to worry about that just because their muscles are so big and strong relative to everything else, right? But anyway, you can imagine that as we move into that era, we're going to have a little bit more favoritism towards exercises that are a little bit less tendon oriented, which I think probably played a role in why a lot of these exercises, which are more tendon dominant, fell out of popularity. Okay, and then on the flip side of that, why were there so many exercises that were popular that were more oriented towards relying a lot on tendon strength? Well, when you're dealing with a natural human, you can't just necessarily build a just massive amount of muscular strength. You can't become 300 pounds of lean muscle in order to get more muscular horsepower for big bench presses and squats. You're only going to build so much muscle. Now, it's more than a lot of people think. It's a lot more than a lot of people think. I mean, you had guys like Warner, who was 6 feet, 6'1", 245 with abs. So it can be a lot more than most people think. Or God, John Grimmick, look at the guy. I mean, just incredible. So it can be more than people think, but you still only have so much to work with in terms of just pure muscular horsepower relative to modern enhanced athletes. So if you want to demonstrate the most strength possible, you're going to have to rely a little bit more heavily on your body structural architecture, on your mobility, things of that nature, to just use your body to its utmost potential to compete. And that works because, again, the natural athletes are more inherently durable. You're running your car under the warranty, so to speak, so everything's designed to work together, and you can really leverage that to do some very impressive things. Like the bent press. You had a lot of guys bent pressing their body weight or more, which, a one-hand lift of over your body weight is pretty impressive, and a lot of guys were bent pressing, or at least a good number of guys were bent pressing over 300 pounds. Very impressive, right? And you can get away with stuff like that if you're a very strong natural. And frankly, it might be a little bit harder for enhanced athletes. I'm not saying they can't do it, but they would definitely have to be more cautious. So that's, and more to the point that I'm making now, they don't have to do that to do something impressive. You don't have to go to those lengths to do something super impressive. You can just train harder at some more basic lifts like the bench press, and bench press 600 pounds if you want. That's incredibly impressive. You can squat incredible weights much more easily. A natural, even an extremely strong natural, is probably, unless you're if you're kind of middle of the road limb lengths, you'll probably top out in the 300 or 400s, and if you're very well gifted for it, you'll probably top out in the 500s. I don't think you're going to have too many naturals benching 600 pounds, right? And most of them will be, frankly, in the 300 or 400s, I think. So there's just not as much room to display incredible strength through those lifts that require just pure muscular horsepower, like the bench press. And if you do want to compete to your highest potential, you're going to have to leverage a lot more skill, a lot more mobility, and a lot more tendon strength to do really impressive things like that. So I think those three, or two, because I guess steroids is kind of one thing, but one thing with two implications that I think are worth discussing independently. You have, on the one hand, the incentive of the industry to just simplify to the lowest common denominator, so that they're putting out information that could be consumed by anybody who happens to pick up a muscle mag. It's just a necessity based on what we're shifting to in terms of the dominant mode of information transmission. Two, you're going to have the pros, the elites, a little bit more hesitant to do exercises that are more likely to result in injury. And number three, the elites have a whole lot less pressure than they previously have to do stuff like that, to to do cool, impressive strength feats, because they now have this whole new option available to them to just get massive muscles and do just bigger lifts, in most cases with more weight than was previously possible. That's kind of this whole new frontier, and you can understand that. I mean, if people have been lifting the same basic weights for a while, and some kind of crazy one-arm variant, but now suddenly you can just bench 600 pounds. I mean, obviously that's going to be a new exciting thing, and you can fully understand why the golden era guys would be like, oh wow, this is this really cool thing. We're looking in a way that no one's looked before. We're lifting weights and just simple basic exercises that no one has ever done before. This is really cool, so we're gonna focus on that instead. It makes sense. Anyway, so I hope that explains my take on what the extinction events were, and why these lifts didn't just die out because they were lame, just like the dinosaurs didn't die out because they were lame. They died out because of a comet. And I think a lot of these lifts died out because of big environmental changes, just like the dinosaurs. Speaking of dinosaurs and environmental changes, I did say that I was going to tell you why Crylophosaurus, you see the kind of crest here, is my favorite dinosaur. My kid's got like 40 of these miniatures of all different types. It's really cute. She's a little girl who's into dinosaurs, but she doesn't have them doing dinosaur stuff like fighting and stuff. It's always the mommy dinosaurs playing, cuddling the baby dinosaurs. That's how she plays with them. But anyway, Crylophosaurus is just really cool. I get into this because my kid's into it. Apparently, this one lived in Antarctica. Now, Antarctica didn't used to be at the South Pole. It was at one point part of one of the big supercontinents. I think there may just have been one. Anyway, it was part of one of the big supercontinents, so it would have been fairly temperate. Anyway, so Antarctica was at one time fairly temperate and part of a bigger supercontinent, but then it started to drift into its present location with all the dinosaurs that it had still on it, and getting increasingly colder. I watched this really cool documentary on the dinosaurs in Antarctica, because I have to preview some of this stuff for the kid, because I don't want her to see really graphic depictions of where the dinosaurs got their meat. I mean, she gets it, but she doesn't need to see it and get nightmares yet. She's small. Anyway, it was cool. It was really cool, because you have Antarctica drifting toward its current location, so it's getting colder and colder. It's starting to, by the time the Crylophosaurus was around, it was already starting to probably have Arctic winters, so it'd be dark for most of the day. You'd have very little sunlight. So anyway, these dinosaurs are probably warm-blooded. They were probably ending up being very intelligent to have to deal with those conditions. They probably had feathers and stuff to insulate them. I mean, we're talking about reptiles moving into essentially Arctic conditions. So it was just kind of really crazy atmospheric thing to just think about, like dinosaurs running around fighting in just an increasingly dark and cold environment. It's like, it's just very atmospheric, very it seems like some kind of a crazy sci-fi setting. You wouldn't think about that being true, but it's just a really, really cool thing to think about. Just like, feathered dinosaurs doing stuff we think about mammalian predators do as they is, you know, their whole world just gets increasingly dark and cold and grim, and just, you know, like dinosaurs running in the snow. It's crazy, right? Anyway, so that's why I think Crylophosaurus is so cool. And I wish they had survived the extinction event, but unfortunately, a lot of cool stuff dies out, even though it may be, you know, very, very well suited to its environment. Just you have the asteroids happen, or your whole freaking continent goes to somewhere it's never been before, and you know, turns into just permafrost. I mean, what are you gonna do? You know, so it's not necessarily a representation of the merit of Crylophosaurus that it didn't make it, just as it's not necessarily a indicative of the merit of some of these exercises from the Bronze and Silver eras that they didn't make it, you know. And maybe a lot of lifters these days don't necessarily want exercises that are adapted to the lowest common denominator, just the dumbest person reading a muscle mag or reading a you know, bodybuilding.com, or something that, you know, works for somebody who's at higher risk of injury due to steroid use. Maybe there are a lot of lifters now who would like something for a more intelligent lifter who's probably going to be natural, or if they're going to go enhanced, they're probably not going to be doing the whole, you know, insulin and whatnot thing. You know, minimal enhancements. I think somebody with minimal enhancements can probably perform these exercises extremely well. Just like, obviously this is not good stuff for you know, your mass monsters, right? But anyway, I think there's a population now that probably does not want the things that survive, which are essentially like rats and stuff. Rats, cockroaches, all that stuff survives all these apocalypses. Maybe we want some stuff that's a little bit cooler, a little bit more specialized, like the Crylophosaurus here. And fortunately, we can bring a lot of the stuff back. We don't have to do any kind of Jurassic Park type mosquito cloning or whatever the case may be. We can just, you know, study these exercises, learn them, and get the benefits from them. And I think a lot of people are already seeing that. I've already seen definite benefit, and I think the best is yet to come. I think we're going to see a lot of previously extinct exercises coming back into vogue as people realize how cool what they can do with them actually is. So unlike the dinosaurs, unfortunately, I do think we're going to have a little bit of a Jurassic Park in the future with many of the lifts of the Bronze and Silver era. So I hope that was a cool way to describe it. I don't know if dinosaurs will be a regular feature of of my videos, but I just thought that was a cool way to get the message across. And if you do find that interesting, check out the video I talked about. It's cool. It's atmospheric.